for the introduction, and everyone else. Again, thank you. Thanks for making the time. This is a topic that's important to me, and I hope that what I'll share today in a little bit less than an hour will help you in wherever you on your journey. So, talk about AI-powered career management for Agilists. About me, so I'm the VP of consulting here at Lightspeed, but I think of myself really as an educator and agile coach, among other things, as far as my sort of primary focus and area of passion and the work that I really love doing these days is really as an educator and doing events like this where I can pass on a little bit of what I've learned. The QR code here, by the way, is from my LinkedIn profile, so feel free to connect if we're not already connected. A little bit about me, 25 years plus in technology throughout all areas of the SDLC. More than 15 of those have been in senior leadership roles, but I'm not trying to impress you with any of this. The reason that I say that is that I approach this conversation from somebody who has been the hiring manager or manager of hiring managers in over 10 different organizations, going dangerously close to 30 years. And across just countless divisions and departments and hundreds of interviews, perhaps thousands. So that informs what I'm talking about today. It's not theoretical. It's things that I have learned that I hope will be helpful to you, but really from the seat of somebody who does a lot of interviews and has hired and not hired a number of people. It's a two-part series, by the way. So today we're going to just be doing the resume basics. Next month, we'll do a follow-on in terms of interviewing. So why does it matter if my resume is a bit imperfect? And I always have to have at least one slide in every PowerPoint of either a kitten and or this confused owl, which is absolutely one of my favorites. But joking aside, this is a big deal. If our resume, this is a survey going back to 2018, but I think it's gotten worse, if not stayed the same, as far as issues with hiring managers or those who are reviewing resumes. If the resume is not up to par. So recruiting managers, those who are actually looking at your resume, if you make it past the applicant tracking system, 77% will pass on your resume just because of typos or bad grammar. Unprofessional email addresses, 35%, 34% are passed just because they don't have quantifiable results. Resumes with long paragraphs of text, I was guilty of that for at least the first decade and a half of my resumes. They read like novels, not good ones always, but long ones. 25% will pass just because it's long paragraphs of text, generic to not specific to a given role or company. 18% pass just based on that. More than 2 pages, 17%. No cover letter. This one surprised me. 10% people are still looking for a cover letter. So these are a lot of things that just sort of get you kicked out of consideration before you really even started. So we'll talk a little bit today about how to mitigate that, to avoid that, and to have a greater likelihood of people looking at your resume and trying to see if you're the right fit for that role. We want to get past those first few steps, and that's what a resume really does. So what I always like to think about, and this is easier in the sphere of agile professionals such as yourselves, remember who's our audience. So since we're leaders in this space, we already focus on knowing our customer. It's core to the principles of agile ways of working. We want to think about who our customer is and provide value to them. Let's use that same idea, that same mindset. When we're defining and refining our resume, they're our customers, so we need to apply that principle. So who is the audience for our resume? Is it an automated process? Pretty much every organization of any size these days is using some sort of applicant tracking system in ATS. So is it an automated process? Is that what we need to solve for with our resume? Is it to make sure that a recruiter, so not the hiring manager, but somebody who is recruiting for that hiring manager, are we trying to satisfy what they're looking for? Is it for somebody within the HR department? Is it for the hiring manager of that position? Is it for other members of the team? Is it for senior members, senior managers in that organization? And the not so secret, right, is that our resume needs to be crafted in such a way that it can satisfy in a succinct and clear way all of those needs, all of the above. And that is something that is achievable. And we'll talk about how to do that today. But when you're developing a resume, it ultimately these days needs to be able to address the needs and the desired understanding of all of those systems and people. We want to be thoughtful, focused, but thoughtful about balancing those needs. And again, something that's an artifact that's going to distill, in some cases, decades of experience into a couple of pages of bullet points. So we want to really do that thoughtfully, and it's difficult to do, but it is doable. And we'll talk about how to approach that today. So I'll quickly go through some positive resume patterns. Whether or not you use AI, these will apply. We'll go through these resume patterns very quickly, and then I'll talk about using generative AI tools to help this process. This is modeled, by the way, on a presentation I did a few years ago. The technology has improved so greatly in the last couple of years that I have really reframed this entire conversation to look at how to appropriately, from my perspective, use these generative AI tools. They don't solve everything, but they really help with this process, this hybrid human and AI process. So some positive patterns. First is to be focused over generalized. You saw that on that career builder stats slide, and employers are looking for something that is directly targeted to what their needs are. And you can understand why that would be the case. It's easier for us for things to be general, but it's more important for them to be specific about the position they have. We really want to focus on outcomes over activity. And that's something that's really difficult for a lot of folks, especially if I'm a Scrum Master. What's my outcome? We'll talk about ways to frame outcomes over activity, because that's what people want to see. What's the impact you had? Not what did you do, but what were the results of what you did? Meaningful metrics over superlative words. Yes, I get the irony of using a superlative word to talk about superlative words, but joking aside, we want to always look for metrics. They're good ways to really focus on what our outcomes have been, and less about hyperbolic or superlative words. We really want to be concrete when we talk about what we've done. Clarity over excessive jargon and acronyms, honesty over misrepresentation and exaggeration, professional in tone and approach and content over personal, and polished and presentable over rushed and inconsistent. So these are 7 of the key patterns that, again, as a hiring manager, as manager of hiring managers, as someone who's worked in some cases to bring on, over 40 people into a new organization, I really have to have good guiding principles to be able to hire, but really to hire at scale. And these are some of the things that I look for and that I educate those that I work with to look for these items. So focused over generalized. So I, as an example, have had a lot of different titles in my career, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And that means that we're qualified for different roles. We've done those things. We can do those things. We have done those things. But again, employers don't want to know everything that you can do. They want to know how what you've done aligns directly to what their specific needs are. So we have this idea in your resume, my resume, as I go back and I look at the resumes that I had 15, 20 years ago, there would be things not as bad as this example here, but honestly, some of my earlier resumes were close to this bad. Manage technical tasks for the company's most important systems. I don't know what that means. And as a hiring manager, that's not really useful for me. But if I change that, again, the action that I took, I'm not changing history. I'm articulating my history differently. So it's the same body of work in before and after, but my after provided 24/7, 365 support for over 10,000 users internationally for the company's Salesforce CRM platform, resolving over 750 tickets monthly with a 90+% satisfaction rating. They're both talking about the same activity, the same event, but one of them is going to be far more compelling for anybody who's looking at my resume. Related to that last example, outcomes over activity. So in all of the work that we do, and again, I have a lot of compassion and understanding of how challenging this can be for some of our roles. For an Agile coach, for example, for a Scrum Master, that's always difficult. What are my outcomes? But I think even though we didn't do the work as a Scrum Master, we can talk about the outcomes in terms of how the team has quantitatively progressed. In this particular example, this is something that I've done, something that I do, something that I did yesterday. trained employees on using Scrum. That's a true statement. It's not really that exciting, and it's an activity. I train people on it. But that same body of work transitioned 3 core teams to leverage the Scrum framework, resulting in 22% lower escape defects and 31% improvement in overall cycle time. Now, as the Scrum Master, did I make all of that happen? Did all of that happen simply from moving to Scrum and my Scrum Master skills? No, but these are related to the work that I did, and it's appropriate to take credit, partial credit at least, in these contexts to talk about as the Scrum Master for this team and educating them and then supporting them. This is how the team progressed. And I think it's completely appropriate to say that my work as Scrum Master helped get to that point. It wasn't solely me, it was the people on the team. But these are impacts that came as a result of this training and this migration to this way of working and the work that I did. So think about this, and this is a good time not to be too egotistical, but to really sing your own praises. That you have made an impact in the work that you've done. Take some credit for it. This is the right time to do that. Meaningful metrics over superlative words. So related to those last 2 slides, I can talk about the fact that I oversaw the development of the company's first online ordering application, greatly increasing volume and revenue. Those are those superlative words. It doesn't matter how much verbiage we use. What you think and what I think and what a hiring manager thinks as far as great increases in volume and revenue, those are relative terms. They don't mean the same thing to everybody. And this is where meaningful metrics can matter. Same body of work, same idea on each of these before and afters. This is actually something that was work that I had done a decade and a half or so ago. And I went back to revise my resume to take some credit for the fact that the work that our team did was able to deliver the first online ordering application for this particular division. And the impact of that was significant. We increased new business 23% and revenue by 12% year over year. Again, was it just the online ordering application? No, but was that a key contributor that is worth calling out the impacts that I can quantify? Absolutely. And so in this instance, again, when I say greatly increasing volume and revenue on the left, that's true, but how much more meaningful is it? And again, for shared understanding, when I use specific business metrics that are meaningful, everybody can understand new business growth. Everyone can understand revenue increases year over year. So this allows anybody who's reading this, business people, technical people, they can understand what that impact was. And those are impacts that matter. Clarity and over excessive jargon and acronyms. So this is sort of a pet peeve of mine. It comes with any technical jobs, but I think it's honestly, for me, one of the things that has caused some struggles with those of us in the Agile community is we have so many words that are confusing to people outside of the work that we do. Just the idea of Scrum Master. I know for a decade, I had to explain what a Scrum Master was because it was a weird word based on a sport that basically very few people in the US even are aware of and don't play. So the idea of modeling after that, there's just a lot of new language. Back to that slide about who's our audience, an HR associate who has just started in that role straight out of college or elsewhere may not have an understanding of what a Scrum Master is. They may not understand what Scrum is, and they shouldn't have to. So how can we make sure that we are using language that's inclusive for understanding, shared understanding? So another real world example, using ASP.NET, Microsoft SQL, and C# built an app to connect to Real EC. Another, I embarrass myself by giving real world examples, but this was a real world example from a couple decades ago that was on my resume. And it's true, but if somebody who was just starting out in HR was reading this, or maybe they're not even familiar with the Microsoft stack, they wouldn't necessarily know what any of that was, and nor should they have to. Same body of work, leverage Microsoft technologies to integrate the company's appraisal, order placement, and tracking capabilities to the Real EC vendor portal, resulting in 186% new order growth year over year. About 75% of that statement is accurate. The percentage is manufactured for this presentation, but it's the same idea. I'm getting specific about the metrics, but I'm also using language that anybody who reads this, if it's somebody who's highly technical, they will likely assume that I'm talking about C# and the Microsoft technologies for development. Let's see. Honesty and misrepresentation, honesty over misrepresentation and exaggeration. This is one that feels, every time I talk about it, it feels weird to have to say it, but the reality is not every time I've looked at a job opening as a hiring manager or manager of hiring managers, but I would say more than 50% of the time, going back decades, I will have at least a few that are completely embellished or worse and outright manufacturing things that are not true. Just don't do it. So some ways that I generally know if somebody's probably not telling the truth. This is hyperbolic for an extreme example, but single-handedly designed, developed, tested, deployed, supported, I could 2,000% user growth month over month. I mean, this is basically super heroics at this point. So anytime I see something that looks like it's outside of the bounds of reality, it always kind of makes me at least sort of get a little bit quizzical and want to dig into it. And also, when I see people who are really talking about things and this is again threading that needle, but you want to take credit for the work that you've done, but in agile ways of working especially, we want to talk about how we've helped teams grow rather than anything we've done single-handedly. So here's another one, and again, Dave, your point on the last one still applies here for me. So in this particular instance, this was in a role where I was actually in charge of a team that was doing this work, so led the development of the recommendation engine. So I was specific in this example. It's not the entirety of the app. It's one element of that app, and I can take pride in celebrating the work that the team did and that my part of it for that subset of the work. I didn't do the entire thing, and I had a really modest but quantifiable improvement. And most employers, I know certainly for me, when I'm looking at resumes, I don't need to see things that are extreme. What I want to see is people who can quantify the impact of the work that they've done and to show a pattern that they've done that type of work in different places, on different products, on different teams, et cetera. I'm looking for patterns over instances, and I'm looking at things that are realistic in terms of growth. The hockey stick, as they call it, projections or those sorts of graphs. People, from what I've seen, leadership, they've seen so many of those. They're attuned to assume, be skeptical about the likelihood and the accuracy of those things. So, don't sell more than you've done, and sell what you've done well, and you will be just fine. All of you have done exceptional work. It's a matter of kind of culling that out of your history and then finding good ways to frame it. But anyone who's here, I am 100% confident you have things that you can celebrate and quantify your impact and how you help move things forward. So tell the truth. The truth is going to be good. Personal over professional. This is another one that surprises me that it's still a thing. And again, I'm kind of a dinosaur, so some of this stuff is probably generational, but regardless, err on the side of professionalism. This is another extreme example, but I've seen things almost as bad. I have not seen an email address of the baddest ninja penguin, but I have seen things that are close to that. I have seen things that are not safe for work as people's email addresses, double entendres and stuff like that. Just don't do it. If you have that email address, you be you, but get another professional email address that people don't have to assume anything about you. We want to really keep a level of professionalism in anything that we do. Your LinkedIn profile, your resume, your email address, all of it. Again, this was one of the ones on that first slide about the career builder. You just get kicked out of consideration at the first step for having an unprofessional email address. Sometimes people are surprised that people would care about that, but that old adage about you never get a second chance to make a first impression. When I've seen these, I will tell you, my thought is this person clearly does not take applying for jobs seriously because it is absolutely free to get a new email address. This says they either don't care or they're not thoughtful about what this implies and telegraphs about who they are as somebody who would work on this team. And it's a way of saying, well, if you don't care about this, then how much would you care about working with this team? How much would you care about this team's culture, et cetera? So whether that's fair or not, that's the way that the world works. Here's another one. These are not real world examples of hobbies and activities. Some people will give you different guidance on this and say that having hobbies or activities on your resume will help connect to the reviewer. Um, Personal experience, personal preference as a hiring manager, unless they are related to the work that you're doing or going to do, there's a lot of risk there. Politics, whatever side you're on, somebody is going to be on a different side. So if you put political things down, good luck. There's no reason to do that. Other hobbies may be relevant, may not be, but err on the side of caution. I always just say, why am I putting this on here? Why does anyone need to know if I played soccer? I, I don't know if that's relevant to any work that I would do. So use your discretion, but I would at least ask that question of why am I including this? What do I hope to get? What do I hope when somebody sees this? What do I hope they will do with that knowledge? Um, so these examples, if you're the chairperson of the local chapter of the Flat Earth Society or beer pong champion, those are my extreme examples for humor or attempted humor. Just leave them off your resume. Here is my real email address, so you can spam me. But so I do include my volunteer work because it's related to what I do, and it also, I hope, tells you about who I am. So I'm a volunteer for the local PMI chapter here in Northern Nevada. I'm proud of that. I'm proud to give back to the community, and it's related to the work that I do. I care a lot about supporting those in need. So board member and volunteer technology support for Meals on Wheels. It also says that I'm a volunteer and I share some of what my experience is for charities that I care about who can't necessarily afford technology support. So, your mileage may vary, but I include those because I think they matter. But I don't include, the fact that I like to go hiking and that I rescue pit bulls. Like it's not really relevant unless your office is in the mountains and we have to hike to it. So, um, last is polished and presentable over rushed and inconsistent. So the problem with everything being so easy to generate, like back in the day, I will date myself. We used to buy cardstock at Office Depot and we would print it out and it would be a printed out cover letter and we'd put stamps on an envelope and we'd put things in the mail. And we don't do any of that anymore. The downside of that is that people can send out resumes that haven't even been spell checked. It's just so easy to distribute them. So we have a lot more quantity, but we suffer sometimes with quality. So um, I I don't think I've ever actually sent a resume with Comic Sans, but I have done things with a weird mix of colors and fonts. So it looks incompetent or certainly unprofessional. This is now or a recent version of my resume using two fonts, good hyperlinks, clear, good white space on the resume. So use templates. That actually can solve most of these problems. But we really want the entirety of the resume to to telegraph. So right, the ATS isn't going to care about formatting, but all the rest of the humans will be looking at it. And if it's hard to read, even if it's just visually hard to read because of the fonts, the size, the spacing, you'd be surprised about how difficult that can make it for some people to actually get past and get into the content if they can't get past the form. So make sure that it's polished and presentable. And that will increase the likelihood of people being able to spend the time focusing on what you've done and what you bring to the table rather than trying to get past any sort of conscious or unconscious bias or preconceived notions that the format of your resume has telegraphed to them. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about incorporating generative AI's help. Um, This is a two-part series. So when I talk about generative AI for career management, the first half is the resume. And as mentioned, the second half next month is going to be about some ideas on helping with the interviewing process. So generative AI can really help with both of them. So these tools, the last time I did this, I used Claude and Claude projects as an example. This time I'm going to use a custom GPT. The idea being you're not bound to any given generative AI tool. Use the one that works best for you. Um, these tools I find to just be incredibly helpful to address some of the issues that I had mentioned on all of those prior slides. If we can incorporate these tools in, I like the phrase of co-pilot, by the way, in this context, because we don't want to outsource the entirety of this process to these tools. And I'll talk a little bit about bad things that can happen if you do, but they're really helpful for some of the things that I talked about on the prior slides about being able to very quickly and effectively do personalization for your resume for a given job role or a given posting. So the resume creation and revision, company and role research, interview preparedness, all of those are things where these tools can be available. And I think I've got 3 of the owl today. That's great. With all of these tools, though, if you do start using them, and I highly encourage it, I will say this 3 or 4 or 12 times, look at the results, because everyone's heard about hallucinations and some of the challenges with these tools. This is another area where you could make things considerably worse for yourself if you don't really fact check the output of these tools. So getting started with generative AI for career management, I'm going to be using a custom GPT that we created and made available on ChatGPT. I'll share that link. I think it's actually part of one of my posts, but we'll get that out there with Maggie's help as well for everybody. But this is available for anybody who has access to the GPT store. These prompts, though, can be used in any tool of your choice. You may not get as good of results because this is custom designed for this purpose, but you'll still get something that will help you. So don't let that slow you down. If you like to use a different tool, use these same prompts. You may have to just iterate a little bit more. Explore other tools, see what works best for you. There are other custom GPTs beyond the one that I built, and I would suggest trying them and see what works best for you. And always just keep up to date with innovations in this area. Like, as we all know, every time I talk about a talk or every time I redo a talk that I've done on generative AI, even if it was a month before, I go back and have to update it. I'm like, has this changed in the last 15 seconds? I see Hitesh is smiling. You know what I'm talking about. So always, if you're watching this video, today's the 9th or the 20th. If you're watching, it's the 19th. If you're watching this video on the 20th, you may want to check and see what's changed since. Joking aside, let's spend the next few minutes talking about how to use these tools. All the screen caps here are real screen caps. I'm always a little bit leery of doing this stuff live in a presentation in case I have connectivity issues, but I have real screen caps from the last day or two. So the first thing is, if you don't want to use these tools for most of the process, you just want some feedback. So before Gen AI, I'd probably reach out to an expert that I know. So I know Hitesh a little bit from some prior conversations. He's an inspiring leader. I would love to get his brain on my resume. I would love, sorry for putting you on the spot, by the way. I hope you don't mind. But I would say, hey, Hitesh, I'm looking at getting a new role. Can you take a look at this? You're an expert in this space. I think that I am, but I need somebody who's not me to take a look at this. So if you don't have access to Hitesh, and so I didn't have time to reach out to Hitesh, so I'm going to use this tool. I can make these changes directly, just like I was talking to an expert, like an expert peer collaborator. Many of us are comfortable making changes directly to our resume. We don't need these tools to recreate the entire artifact. This is a good place to start. My example, so for whatever reason, and I know I'm being recorded, but I'm not embarrassed enough to avoid saying this, I keep resumes going back to like the late 90s. I don't know why. Hitesh and I both apparently do this. So I found one that was like 15 years old, and I'm like, this is a mess. Let me just throw it in here. And so you can see my prompt on the right. Attached resume is about a decade old. Update it based on current standards and align to what trends are changing in agile ways of working, including a focus on product management, the product operating model, and scaling agile with safe and agile PMOs or VMOs. So note that in my example, I have an opinion on what's happened in our market in terms of agile ways of working. We talked about this in some of the prior coaching circles that from my vantage point, I believe that there's some consensus on this. Commoditized agile coaching, even at the enterprise level, people don't necessarily appreciate that perhaps as much as they used to. I'm being diplomatic with my language. But the areas where people are saying they can't find people enough is people who are really acquainted and understand and expert in the product operating model or the product model or product management in general. I have a lot of experience there. I want to incorporate that focus in my resume. The other is since 15 years ago or so, things have changed a lot in terms of scaling agile, and that's an area where organizations still really need support, whether it's scaled agile or other approaches. And then the idea of the VMO, so Lightspeed, from my understanding and from what I can see historically, actually created the term of VMOs. Everybody is on the VMO bandwagon now, and that's great. I have a lot of experience in agile PMOs and with the VMOs. I want my resume to reflect that. So those are things that I specifically put in here. And you can see it provides key updates and it tells me what to do. So if I want to do this on my own, I just want guidance. I'm talking to, not an expert as much as Hitesh, but somebody, because I need to talk to somebody about updating this. If I don't have someone I can go to, this is a great way to get that feedback. I think honestly, if I did give my resume to Hitesh, he'd probably say the same things. Say, hey, buddy, this is a little bit antiquated. Use something that supports ATSs. Talk about Agile at scale and product. Talk about what's happening in terms of coaching and training trends. So not verbatim and probably not enumerated, but these are the updates that made sense to me that I was expecting to see and that I might hear when I talk to a fellow expert. This idea of updating certifications and tools, that resume, there were no scaled Agile certs back then, but I've got some now. Those sorts of things, tooling trends, those Jira Align, Miro, those sorts of things. So it suggested a bunch of things. I don't know that I would incorporate all of them, but I would incorporate elements of all of those 5 enumerated items. It presented all of these for me in a very succinct and clear way. And combined with what I asked it to focus on, it provided a really good list. So if I want to co-design with generative AI at that point, I now can take, now this is the Agile Career Coach. This is the one that I was talking about. It's just a custom GPT with some focused areas in terms of hiring and role expectation for folks in the Agile community. And you can access it on ChatGPT store. So I had a more recent version of my resume. I took the last one that I had, which is from Q4 of last year. And I put this into the tool and I provided this context. Before I ask it to generate customized versions of my resume, I'm going to ask for a single general holistic resume. I don't have a whole lot of time to go into the details of why to do that other than saying every instance and interaction I have with these tools, it gets something wrong. What it gets wrong is different almost every time, but it will always get something wrong. So having it finish with a generic superset version is a really good starting point to clean up everything and then use that as the branching off point for custom versions. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have a general area or focus for this desired type of role, you can input that in the prompt for context. So if it's truly just generalist Agile and you can be an Agile PM, Scrum Master, product owner, et cetera, you can be that broad. But if you're traditionally an Agile coach, a Scrum Master, or Agile PM, those have enough connective tissue that could be the focus of your resume. So it's really up to you and how generic you want or how broad you want your generic version to be. If you can upload, as I did, as a PDF, or you can just copy and paste your current resume or CV into the body of it along with the context at the same time. If you don't have a resume for whatever reason, if you have a decent LinkedIn profile, same thing, you can copy paste that, or you can export the contents to a PDF and then load the PDF. So whichever way is most closely aligned to how you have that information today is what I'd suggest. Don't overthink it. In this context, though, I provided that specific prompt, and really, you want to be careful and thoughtful with your prompt. So, I'm an enterprise agile and lean consultant, coach, and trainer looking for a new leadership role. I do both hands-on and strategic work. Provide a comprehensive, generic resume based on the attached resume that I can use as a foundation for role or company specific resumes and for general sharing. So that hopefully that makes sense. You always do want to have a generic version. You may come along and meet somebody and it's not for a specific role. They just want to know about you. There are instances like that when you're doing informal networking, in-person networking, that you want to send this over. And if it's not for a specific role, that's where a general sort of background overview can be really helpful. So with this, it gave me a comprehensive generic resume that I can use as that foundation. So it very quickly generated what I would say is a nicely formatted summary. It provided these core competencies. There are some challenges with keeping context and providing appropriate answers and hallucination. So you always want to check the output. Always, always, always. I'll give you an example, a real world example that came up yesterday when I was doing this. But for the generic version, it did a pretty good job. It looked at my prior resume. It looked at what I was looking for in terms of changes and modernization of the resume. And so it added some good things in terms of my background with AI and natural language processing, but also the enterprise agile lean transformation, product operating model, and portfolio management. So I will say it did a pretty nice job of succinctly binding those different disparate areas together in something that to me seemed cohesive. Um, you may have to do some manual correction depending on what comes in. And what I found also is there's a certain point of diminishing returns. So if you're iterating when you review the results, in some cases, because it's not as predictable as we often would like, when we ask it to fix one thing, it will often break something else. So I found in some cases, if it's close enough to simply, if you're updating your resume and it's formatting something poorly, it changed the bullet points to enumerated values or something. It's easier to fix it on your own rather than trying to have it do that, because it often will break something as it regenerates the response. So I would just say assess that on a case-by-case basis as you're doing it, but just know in some cases it's going to be far more efficient to make some of the last changes manually. So now that we've got a general version of our resume, now we can start aligning it to specific roles. And again, one of the key data points on that 2018 Career Builder slide, people want to see specific role specific, and sometimes job posting specific resume versions. And that was really difficult to do when it was manual. This is one of the great use cases for me for generative AI. So in this particular instance, if I have a particular type of role that I'm interested in, I can have it generate roles based on those specific areas. If I want a product leadership focus for one and an agile leadership focus for another, have it generate each of those. If I have a deep technical background, Hitesh, I hope you don't mind that I keep putting you on the spot, but Hitesh has an exceptional leadership background, an exceptional agile background, and an exceptional technical background. He may be somebody who would want to have a highly technical leadership position role and talk about agile as a way of doing work, and may want to have a highly agile specific role, but talking about his technical skills. How the resume frames that, though, same experience, same ability to do certain things, but how it's framed is aligned to that particular job family or job category. So, and a lot of you may be like that. I'm like that as well. There's a number of different things that I can do, but I want to have a resume that's specific to each of those areas, that's aligned to a specific role. And this particular one, I got that generic one. And so my next prompt, I'm keeping this context, generate a version specifically for a VP or director of transformation with a focus on my scaled agile and VMO experience. And it dutifully then provided a resume. I didn't have enough room to put the entire thing on the screen, But you can see that the summary is materially different than what you saw on the prior slide when I was asking for just a generic version. So this talks about, although I hate the phrase results driven, but the rest of it's really helpful. So it wove in things that would matter in an executive leadership position. So this will apply for any of you and the role that you're looking for. It's going to reframe the work that you've done aligned to the versions for a particular role or sort of role category. Refine, 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 manually or with generative AI tools. But we want to keep doing this until we've got the version of the resume that we think is going to most likely open that door for us getting the interview. That's really what we're trying to do. So doing this process takes time, focus, and effort. The first response that I've seen is almost always insufficient, inaccurate, or just not what's wanted. This is a little bit more you saw on the prior slide. We want to interact with a generative AI tool really to ask for the types of changes that we want to see. Even though the example, the role was for PMO, VMO leader, APMO, VMO leader, the changes weren't as significant as I wanted. So I'm going to keep reframing my prompts and take as many iterations as required till I get to a final product. From that, hiring managers and how we continue getting more focused and targeted resumes. Hiring managers are going to want to see the specific areas and aspects of their specific postings in your resume. So now that I've got a role specific position, I can use my general version depending on how specific that specific role is and how different it is from the other resumes that I have. I can use that as a foundation and align then and customize my resume for each specific job posting that I'd like. In this particular instance, I found this on LinkedIn and thought this might be a fun one to use for the example. So this is a director of digital transformation. And this is LinkedIn posting, obviously, but you can get it from anywhere. It's not just about the specific items that are requested in this particular posting, but removing things that aren't relevant. I think as much as we talk about what needs to be on your resume, we also need to talk about what's not on your resume because it's noise. That's part of the reason for customization is leaving out things that aren't relevant, even if you've done them, if they don't matter for this role. Being able to use generative AI just makes this entire process so much more efficient and effective. It truly is a superpower from my perspective. In this example, I took this job posting and I'm going to have it create a resume just for this posting. I tried to use the search functions in ChatGPT and it gave up and said it couldn't. So I just copied and pasted the posting. You can see that what was on that prior screen, I just pasted it right into the chat window for ChatGPT. And I then asked for a customized version of my new generic resume focused specifically on this new role. And then based on that, it generated a customized resume for that role. It tells me what it highlighted. It aligned it with an emphasis on Salesforce, automation, AI-driven solutions, and agile execution. So I don't have a bullet point for this on the slide, and I know we're getting close to time. There's one thing on here that I mentioned before about the things where we really need to assess the output of generative AI tools. This is an unintended, perfect, very significant example. My experience with Salesforce is minimal and it's over a decade old. I don't have it on my resume anywhere, not at all. I don't have it on my LinkedIn profile. I've never talked about Salesforce publicly. I don't talk about things that I don't feel like I'm very good at. And it just added it for me. It added as core expertise. It is, it is not my core expertise. I do a lot of things well. That's not one of them. So be careful because this also ends up hitting that point on one of my earlier slides about don't lie or mislead. If they're asking for Salesforce, there's different ways to say, I'm familiar with other CRM systems. I'm familiar with large scale, highly customized COT systems, but I'm never going to tell someone that I have Salesforce experience if I don't. So this isn't one of those instances where we really have to go through and I would probably just say remove any instances references to Salesforce. I don't have that. Only use items that are on my resume to generate this resume, this specific resume. So those are the sorts of things to be very cautious about. If you need a cover letter, again, this feels like an anachronism to me, but some people are still asking for it. If you already have this in context, though, if you need one or if you want one, it's very easy. You just say generate a cover letter for OutSystems in this role. I always tell it to use my voice and tone. It's my voice and tone are not standard, and you will know if AI generated something that I wrote because my language and tone and verbiage is very unique to me. So whether this is exactly my tone, it's at least pretty close. It's informal but professional, and not overly ornate. Specify how the cover letter will be sent if necessary, email or LinkedIn or whatever. Provide the details like I did to save time and effort. If you don't need to iterate, just put all of it in the context in the initial prompt. Um, I hate cliches like game changer. I don't like salesy words. I don't like people who are trying to sell stuff to me all the time. So I don't use that in how I talk, and so I preemptively say just don't use these words. They're annoying to me. And again, refine that final output if needed, if you use a tone and language that aligns with how you speak and write. I almost always have to tweak it because I want it to be my voice. So then what? Well, you don't have to stop there. We have all this stuff in context, and this is another thing that I think is just really cool. If you're not sure what to do next, if you haven't been looking for work for a while, um, but you're starting to send out resumes, ask the same tool. What do I do next? So I said, give me some ideas what to do after I submit my resume. And honestly, these are pretty good. Follow up strategically, give some guidance, give some verbiage, give some suggestions on how to keep that process going. I thought this was kind of cool. So again, not all these are going to be things you want to do or you think make sense, but it's at least a place to get started. And there's a lot of value in that, especially again, if this is new and alien to you. Job searching is really unpleasant for about 100% of the people involved. So how can we make that process a little bit easier and more humane? And then some key takeaways. And then Maggie, we probably have a couple of things you need to do in terms of right before we finish. So I'll talk really quickly. And if I didn't get to any questions, by the way, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation. So some key takeaways: avoid those common mistakes, know your audience, be focused and outcome driven, use metrics, right? Things that people can wrap their head around in terms of quantification. Um, have that clarity and professionalism in everything that you provide. Your resume is representation of who you are and how you are. Be honest and authentic. And then as we look at leveraging AI, use it as a collaborative tool. Don't outsource your brain to it, obviously, but it's a great place to get started, to refine things, to create things if you don't know how to get started. Make sure that you're using AI for keyword optimization. Have it generate those targeted resumes and cover letters. It makes that process possible. For me, it was never sustainable to do that and do that well before generative AI tools were available. And then again, just if you're going to use generative AI tools, and really honestly, even if you're just doing all of this without the tools, it is a process of refinement. Either way, if you're sending out hundreds of resumes and getting no responses, that would be something to say, what might I need to tweak so I'm at least getting some initial responses and feedback. So with that, that is the end of the session. Thank you so much for taking the time.